Imagine you are striving and you buy a slice of pizza. That very first slice tastes amazing. It gives you a maximum satisfaction. But what happens when you eat a second slice or the third slice? By the fifth slice, you feel sick and the satisfaction drops to zero. In economics, we call this satisfaction utility. And the drop in the satisfaction is the law of diminishing marginal utility. Welcome back to Bala Economics. Today we are cracking the chapter 3, the theory of consumer behavior. I will show you how consumers make a choice with their limited money and exactly how to solve these optimization graphs on your freshman exam. Let's jump straight into the first slide. In our day-to-day life, we buy different goods and services for consumption. As consumer, we act to drive satisfaction by using goods and service. But have ever thought of how your mother or any other person whom you know decides to buy those consumption goods and service? Consumer theory is based on what people like, so it begins with something that we cannot directly measure but must infer. That is, consumer theory is based on the premise that we can infer what people like from the choice they make. Consumer behavior can be best understood in the three ways. The first, by examining a consumer's preference, we need practical ways to describe how people prefer one good to another. The second, we must take into account that consumers face budget constraints. They have limited incomes that restrict the quantity of goods they can buy because of their budget constraints. The third, we will put consumer preferences and a budget constraint together to determine the consumer's choice. This is how can we understand the behavior of the consumer. Consumer preference. A consumer makes a choice by comparing a bundle of goods. Given any two consumptions bundle, the consumer either decides that one of the consumption bundle is strictly better than the other, or decide that she or he indifferent between the two bundles. In order to tell whether one bundle is preferred to another, we see how the consumer behaves in choice situation involving two bundles. If she always chooses X when Y is available, then it is a natural or to say that this consumer preference X to Y. We use the symbol like this to mean that one bundle is strictly preferred to another, so that X is preferred to Y should be interpreted as saying that the consumer strictly prefers X to Y, in the sense that she definitely wants X bundles rather than the Y bundle. If the consumer is indifferent between two bundles of goods, we use the symbols of such like, and writes X with this symbol, X to Y. Indifferent means that the consumer would just satisfied according to her own preference, consuming the bundle X as she would be consuming bundle Y. If the consumer prefer or it is indifferent between two bundles, we say that she weakly prefer X to Y and writes X preferred to Y weakly. Totally indifferent means facing the problem to choose which one is best if both is the same. The relation of strict preference, weak preference, and indifferent are not independent concepts. The relations are themselves related. For example, if x prefers to y and the y prefers to x, we can conclude that x is different to y. That is, if the consumer thinks that x is at least as good as y, and that y is at least as good as x, then she must be indifferent between the two bundles of goods. Similar, if x with y, but we know that it is not the case that x preferred to y, we can conclude that x is preferred to y. This is just say that if the consumer thinks that x is at least as good as y, and she is not indifferent between the two bundles, then she thinks that x is strictly better than y. Now let us come to the concept of utility. We have said what is utility before. Now let's go in detail. Economists use the term utility to describe the satisfaction or pleasure derived from the consumption of goods or service. In other words, utility is the power of a product to satisfy human wants. Given any two consumption bundles X and Y, the consumer definitely wants X bundles than Y bundles if and only if the utility of X is better than the utility of Y. Do you think that utility and the usefulness are synonyms or similar? Do two individuals always derive equal satisfaction from the consuming the same levels of products? In defining utility, it is important to bear in mind the following points. Utility and the usefulness are not synonyms. For example, painting by Picasso may be usefulness functionally, but offer great utility to art lovers. Hence, usefulness is product strict, whereas utility is consumer strict or centric. Product centric and consumer centric. Usefulness is product centric. The center is a product, whereas utility is consumer centric. The center of the utility is consumer centric. Utility is subjective. The utility of product will vary from person to person. That means the utility that two individuals derive from consuming the same level of product may not be the same. For example, non-smokers do not derive any utility from cigarettes. Utility can be different at different places at different time. For example, the utility that we get from drinking coffee early in the morning may be different from the utility we get drinking at lunchtime. This is because of a time. The other things that we are going to see under this chapter is approaches of measuring utility. How can we measure utility? Or how can we measure satisfaction? How do you measure or compare the levels of the satisfaction or utility that you obtain from goods and the service? There are two major approaches to measure or compare consumers' utility or consumers' satisfaction from a product. Those are cardinal utilities and ordinal approach utilities. The cardinalist school postulated that utility can be measured objectively. The cardinalist says that we can measure utility objectively. It is not subjectively, that says. According to the ordinalist school, utility is not measurable in cardinal number rather than consumer can rank or order the utility he derives from different goods and service. The cardinalist said it can be measured by number. We can make it 2, 3, or 4, or 5, we can measure in cardinal number. But ordinalist school of thought say that it is not possible to measure utility by using number because it is not measurable. Rather, we can say the first, the second, the third. Total and marginal utilities. Total utility and the marginal utility. Total utility is the total satisfaction a consumer gets from consuming some specific quantity of commodity at a particular time. This is total utility. As consumer consume more of good per time period, he or she total utility increase. However, there is saturation point for that commodity beyond which the consumer will not be capable of enjoying any greater satisfaction from it. Marginal utility. It is extra satisfaction a consumer realizes from additional units of products. In other words, marginal utility is a change in total utility that results from consumption of one more unit of product. Graphically, it is a slope of a total utility. Marginal utility is the slope of a total utility. Mathematically, marginal utility equal to change of total utility over change of quantity, where change of total utility is the change in total utility and the delta Q is the change in amounts of product consumed. To explain the relationship between total utility and the marginal utility, let us consider the following hypothetical example. To explain the relationship between total utility and the marginal utility, let us consider the following hypothetical example. The cardinal utility theory. According to the cardinal utility theory, utility is measurable by arbitrary units of measurement called utilities in the form of 1, 2, 3, its. Example, we may say that consumption of an orange gives Billion 10 utilities and a banana gives her 10 utilities for Billion and 8 utilities from bananas and so on. From this, we can assert that Billion gets more satisfaction from orange than from banana because according to cardinalists, Billion gets 8 utils from banana and 10 from orange. So she's satisfied from orange than from banana. Assumptions of the cardinal utility theory. What is utility theory of cardinalist assumption? They assume the cardinal approach is based on the following major assumptions. The first one is a rationality of consumer. The main objective of consumer is to maximize his or her satisfaction given her or his limited budget or income. So in order to maximize his or her satisfaction, the consumer has to be rational. Second, utility is cardinally measurable. According to the cardinal approach, the utility or satisfaction of each commodity is measurable. Utility is measured in subjective unit called utilities. Constant marginal utility of money, the other one. A given unit of money deserves the same value at any time or place it is to be spent. A person at the start of the month where he has received monthly salary gives equal value to Amber with what he may give it after 3 weeks or so. This is constant marginal utility of money. You're not satisfied with money, whatever amount of money you get. Whatever your salary increase, whatever income you generate, utility of money is constant. This fourth, diminishing marginal utilities. The utility derived from each successive units of commodity diminish. In other words, the marginal utility of commodity diminish as the consumer acquire larger quantity of it. This, all of this will be observed from the following diagram or from the following paragraph. We can see detail. The fifth, the total utility of basket of goods depends on the quantity of the individual commodity. If there are any commodities in the bundle with quantity of x1, x2 to xn, the total utility is given by f of x1, f of x2, x3, and so on. This is a total utility function. Total and the marginal utility. Quantities, total utilities, marginal utility. See, for zero quantity, total utility is 0. For one quantity, the total utility is 10. For 2, that is 8. And then total utility is increasing and increasing and increasing. After reaching the maximum, it again decreasing to 28, as you see. This is how can we get total utilities. This is, we can get total utility in this form. Then when we reach a maximum, this is a saturation point when you satisfy it. Then it become a negative, or it become decreasing time, or it decreases. How can we explain this one? We can explain in the graph by taking example. Marginal utility. Marginal utility is the change of total utility over the change of quantity. This means marginal utility of the second minus marginal utility of the first over quantity of the second minus quantity of the first. Let us start from 1 because the first one is 0. Marginal utility as quantity 2 equal to total utility of 2 minus, that means 18 minus 10 over 2 minus 1. 18 minus 10 is 8, 2 minus 1 is 1, that is 8 over 1. Then the marginal utility is 8. Then marginal utility as 3. 24 minus 18 over 3 minus 2, that is 24 minus 80 becomes 6, so that is 3 minus 2 is 1, so 6 over 1, the marginal utility is 6. It is decreasing from time to time, and the reach 2, then become 0, then become negative. We can see from our graph, easily we can understand it. I will give you example how this one is negative, what is negative means, what is 0 means, and so on. The total utility first increase. It reached the maximum when the consumer consumes 6 units, and then decline as the quantity consumed increase. When we increase our consumption, our utility is decreasing. On the other hand, the marginal utility continuously decreases, even become 0 or become negative as quantity consumed increases. What this means? Graphically, let us take what that means. As we see from our graph, the first graph shows that total utility. The second graph shows that marginal utility. Let us take example from our perspective. If you start to eat food, when you start to eat food or your lunch, at first time your satisfaction is increasing, and increasing. You consume, it is increasing, you are satisfied, and after a while, when you reach at maximum, that means when you satisfied, when you feel it satisfied, At that time, it is maximum. You cannot eat anything at that time because you are already satisfied. Your satisfaction reached saturation point or maximum points. At this point, your total utility is maximum. From table we have seen, this is 30 points, 30. But if you try to eat again, your satisfaction is decreasing in the reach 28, you said, from your points. From the table we have seen, it reaches 28, from 30 28. What about your marginal utility? Your marginal utility at first is somewhat up, but decreasing and decreasing. It reaches at zero when total utility reach a maximum. What does that mean? Marginal utility becomes zero means. Marginal utility is additional utility or additional product you consume. For example, if you eat injera or bread, additionally, if you add banana, then if you eat banana on addition to its bread, it becomes zero. You cannot consume piece of banana when it becomes zero. The total utility is decreasing. We have said you are already satisfied. Additional utility or additional banana you consume on bread becomes zero. This means you cannot consume one piece. But what happens if you eat over this zero? It becomes negative. Or you see that it become -2. The marginal utility is -2. What does that mean in our consuming? This is a time when you are vomiting. It is a time when you are trying to decrease what you have taken. Because it is negative means it is vomiting time. You vomit because of that, it is over. As it can be observed from this figure, when total utility increasing, marginal utility is positive. Yes. When total utility is maximum, that means it reaches saturation point, marginal utility is zero. When total utility decreases, marginal utility is negative. Then where total utility, the bread you eat is decreasing, your satisfaction is decreasing, you don't want to eat more, marginal utility become negative. This is a time when you are vomiting if you eat more than this. Is that clear? The other one is the law of diminishing marginal utility. Now let us see the law of diminishing marginal utility. Is utility you get from the consumption of the first orange the same as the second or the third orange? The law of diminishing marginal utility states that as the quantity consumed of commodity increase per unit of time, the utility derived from each successive unit decrease. Consumption of all other commodity remain constant. In other words, the extra satisfaction that consumer drive declines, that means marginal utility, as he or she consume more and more of the products in a given period of time. This gives a sense in that the first banana a person consumes gives him more marginal utility than the second banana also gives him higher marginal utility than the third and so on. You will see from figure 3.1. The law of diminishing marginal utility is based on the following assumption. The first one is consumer is rational. The consumer consumes identical or homogeneous products. The commodity to be consumed should have similar quality, color, design, etc. Sorry. There is no time gap in consumption of the goods. The consumer's tastes or preference remain unchanged. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of today's session. I hope you find it helpful and informative. If you enjoyed the lesson, don't forget to like and subscribe. In the coming, we will see different um, utility parts. As we said, this is the introduction to economics that you can get from your class also. This is the way can we define utility. This one. If there is a problem, you can ask me on my YouTube. You can send me a message. I can explain more than this.